My name is Claire Henson Brooks. I am 36 years old, married, and the mother of 2 children who spent the week believing Father's Day was still a safe place to love their grandfather. On Sunday morning at 8:06, my brother Mark sent me a text that proved it was not. Dad doesn't want your family here today. He said it would be easier without Evan and the kids. Don't make him say it twice. I stood in my kitchen with a roll of blue wrapping paper tucked under one arm and read the message until the words stopped looking like words. Evan was in the garage loading the cooler. My 7-year-old son Miles was at the table drawing crooked little hammers on a handmade toolbox card. My 10-year-old daughter Ava had spent 40 minutes deciding whether to write Grandpa Bill or Papa Bill on the envelope because she wanted it to feel special. She walked in at the exact moment my hands started shaking. "Mom," she asked, holding up the card, "do you think Grandpa likes blue better or red?" I looked at her. I looked at my phone. Then I looked at the cooler by the door, the framed photos I had wrapped the night before, the paper bag full of barbecue napkins, the lemon pie my mother had asked me to bake because yours always turns out right. For one foolish second, I tried to translate Mark's cruelty into something survivable. Maybe he had worded it badly. Maybe Dad had said he was tired. Maybe there had been some misunderstanding, some smaller sentence that Mark had sharpened because sharpening things was what he did when he wanted me to bleed without getting his hands dirty. So I typed back. "Did Dad say those exact words?" Mark replied almost immediately. "He doesn't want a scene. We're all sick of pretending that your side of the family belongs at every Henson thing. Your side of the family. My husband of 12 years, my children who carried my father's laugh, my mother's eyes, and the last name my parents had celebrated when they were born." Ava was still waiting for an answer about the card. I heard myself say, "Blue is perfect, sweetheart." She smiled and went back to the table. That tiny smile did something worse than anger. It reminded me that children keep offering love until adults teach them where it is not wanted. I took a screenshot. Then I sent it to my father. For 5 minutes, nothing happened. 5 minutes can become a whole lifetime when you are waiting to learn whether your father really asked to exclude your children. I watched the little delivered check mark under the image. I watched the screen dim. I touched it awake. I imagined Dad reading the text and putting the phone face down because peace had always been easier for him than confrontation. I imagined him calling Mark into the hallway. I imagined him saying, "Claire is too sensitive. Just tell her to come another day." That was the old wound talking. Then Dad called. His voice was not soft. It was not confused. It was the voice I remembered from childhood, from the repair shop floor, from the mornings when a hydraulic hose burst or a mower blade came loose and everyone knew to step back. "Claire," he said, "bring Evan, bring the kids, and bring every file Evan asked me about last month." I gripped the counter. "Dad, did you say it?" "No." The word came out like a door slamming. Behind him, I heard my mother ask what was wrong. I heard Mark say, "Dad, hang up." I heard paper moving. Dad lowered his voice, but not enough for fear. I never told him that, but now I know why he wanted you gone. Before I tell you what my father was being asked to sign that morning, and why my brother's face changed when Dad made him open the office in front of everyone, tell me what time it is where you are and where you're watching from. I always wonder how far stories travel when they are about families who confuse silence with loyalty. My father's name is William Henson, but everyone in Ashford called him Bill. For almost 40 years, he owned Henson Equipment and Feed, a repair shop and supply store on the edge of town where farmers brought broken tractors, landscapers bought mower belts, and half the county came for advice they did not always pay for. The place smelled like motor oil, dust, sweet feed, rubber hoses, and the coffee Dad forgot on the counter until it turned cold. There was a hand-painted sign near the register that said, "If you borrowed it, bring it back cleaner." I used to think that sign was about tools. Later, I understood it was my father's whole philosophy of life. At least, it had been. When I was little, Dad let me sort bolts into baby food jars under the workbench. By 10, I could sweep the front room better than Mark. By 13, I knew how to write a receipt, count cash, and recognize which customers were embarrassed to ask for more time. Dad taught me to treat those people gently. Hard seasons come for everybody, he would say. Don't make a decent man beg twice. I loved him for that. I also learned too early that some people received that gentleness as grace, and some treated it like an account with no limit. Mark was 4 years older than me and had always been better at being seen. He could walk into the shop at noon, clap 3 men on the shoulder, tell one funny story about high school football, and be praised for keeping the Henson spirit alive. I could spend 6 hours reconciling supplier invoices in the back office and be told I was so organized. Organized was another word my family used when they meant useful. My younger sister Jenna was different. She was not aggressive like Mark. She survived by becoming pleasant around whoever held the room. If Mark mocked me, Jenna smiled weakly and said, "He doesn't mean it like that." If Mom asked me to handle something nobody else wanted, Jenna whispered, "You're better at this stuff anyway." For years, those sentences felt like comfort. Now I know they were instructions. Stay calm, stay useful, stay easier to disappoint. After Dad's heart scare 2 years earlier, those instructions became the family operating system. It was not a major heart attack, thank God, but it frightened all of us. Dad spent 3 days in the hospital and 6 weeks at home pretending not to need help. Mom became anxious around medicine schedules and blood pressure numbers. Jenna organized a meal train and cried when people thanked her. Mark announced he would step up at the shop. I handled the things nobody posted about. I paid the hospital balance when Mom said the bill made her dizzy. I updated insurance policies, scanned old vendor contracts, reviewed payroll, and called the bank after Mark missed a deadline that would have triggered penalties. Evan, my husband, helped because he is the kind of man who sees stress in a room and quietly moves toward the heaviest box. Evan is an accountant, not flashy, not loud. He has a way of listening that makes people either trust him or fear him, depending on what they are hiding. At first, the shop's financial problems looked like normal family business mess. A vendor credit applied twice. A customer deposit recorded 3 days late. Fuel charges coded under repairs. A petty cash withdrawal with no receipt. When Evan mentioned it, Mark laughed and called him the auditor. "Relax," Mark said. "This isn't one of your corporate spreadsheets. This is a family shop." Evan did not respond sharply. He rarely does. He only said, "Family money still has to add up." The room went quiet, and I felt the familiar heat of embarrassment rise into my neck. Not because Evan was wrong, but because he had spoken a truth I had spent years editing into softer language. On the drive home, I asked him to ease up. He glanced at me, then back at the road. "Do you want me to ease up because I'm wrong?" he asked. "Or because they don't like hearing it?" I hated that question. Not because it was cruel, because it was precise. For the next year and a half, I tried to exist between worlds. I helped Dad when he asked. I calmed Evan when he noticed irregularities. I defended my family when he wondered why they treated him like hired help until they needed him, then like an outsider once he asked questions. I told myself Mark was careless, not dishonest. I told myself Mom avoided conflict because Dad's health worried her. I told myself Jenna's silence was fear, not agreement. And I told myself my children did not notice. That last lie broke before Father's Day. 2 weeks earlier, we had dinner at my parents' house. Ava brought a school project she had built with Evan, a wooden model of a suspension bridge. She wanted to show Dad because he had worked on county bridge repairs before buying the shop. Ava carried it in with both hands, proud and nervous. Before Dad could look closely, Mark leaned back and said, "Careful, Ava. Around here, your mom likes building things so she can remind everyone she owns them." The adults laughed the way people laugh when they want cruelty to pass quickly. Ava did not understand every word, but she understood enough. Her shoulders lowered. She folded the project board and slid it beneath her chair. I said, "Mark, don't use my daughter for a joke." It came out too small. He lifted both hands. "See, this is what I mean. Everything becomes a trial." Dad murmured, "Let's just eat." Mom changed the subject to pie. Jenna gave me a look that meant please don't make this worse. On the drive home, Ava looked out the window for a long time. Then she asked, "Why does Uncle Mark act like he doesn't like us?" I opened my mouth, closed it. There are answers children should not have to earn by being hurt. Finally, Evan said gently, "Some adults don't know how to handle feeling small, so they try to make other people feel small first." Ava thought about that. "Does Grandpa know?" she asked. Neither of us answered quickly enough. The next morning, Evan found the loan statement. Dad had asked me to scan a folder of old documents for tax records. Tucked between insurance renewals and supplier contracts was a loan packet from Cedar Valley Bank. The loan was for $286,000. It was secured partly by shop equipment and partly by the rear acreage behind Henson Equipment and Feed. The signature page listed Mark as authorized operations representative. The loan purpose read, "Capital improvement and asset consolidation." I had never heard those words used around Dad. When Evan showed him the packet, Dad frowned. I didn't sign a new equipment loan. Mark was at the counter pretending to inventory seed bags. I saw his hand pause. Then he laughed. "Dad, that was the renewal packet in March. You were tired. I told you I'd handle the bank stuff." Dad rubbed his chest in the place he touched when he felt overwhelmed. Maybe Evan asked for the full digital file. Mark said he would send it. He did not. After that, Mark's jokes changed. He stopped mocking me only as dramatic and started framing Evan as dangerous. The accountant doesn't trust family. Claire brings her auditor because she thinks Dad can't read. Careful what you say. Evan might put it in a folder. The jokes sounded casual, but now I understand they were insulation. Mark was teaching everyone to treat scrutiny as betrayal before scrutiny arrived. Father's Day was supposed to repair things. That sounds pathetic when I write it plainly, but hope often looks pathetic from the outside. I ordered Dad's favorite barbecue from Miller's Smokehouse. I hired a local high school quartet to play old country songs after lunch because Dad had cried once hearing Blue Eyes crying in the rain. I printed photos of Dad with each grandchild and placed them in small wood frames for the porch tables. Ava painted a sign that said, "Papa Bill's Repair Crew." Miles made the toolbox card with cardboard wrenches glued crookedly inside. Mark was supposed to bring ice. Jenna was supposed to bring salad. Mom was supposed to rest. I was supposed to make everything feel effortless so everyone could call it family. Then the text came. "Dad doesn't want your family here today." The cruelty hurt, but the method frightened me. Mark had not said what he wanted. He had used Dad as a weapon. He knew exactly where the wound was deepest. For most of my life, I had been able to survive Mark's resentment because I believed Dad, somewhere beneath his silence, still knew I belonged. I believed my father's quietness was avoidance, not rejection. Mark's text reached into that belief and twisted it. That was why I sent the screenshot. Not to start a war, to find out whether I had already lost one. When Dad called and told us to come, I felt relief so sharp it almost became pain. Evan came in from the garage while I was still holding the phone. "What happened?" I showed him. He read the text. His expression did not change, but his jaw tightened. Then he asked, "What do you want to do?" That question undid me more than Mark's message, because nobody in my family asked what I wanted. They asked whether I could bring something, fix something, overlook something, pay something, understand something. I whispered, "Dad says come." Then we come. The kids? He looked toward the dining table, where Ava was helping Miles spell favorite on the card. They should not have to earn their place by staying home. We arrived at the farmhouse 30 minutes later. The Henson farmhouse was white with peeling porch rails, a deep front yard, and a pecan tree that shaded half the gravel drive. My parents had lived there since before I was born. Around it lay the pieces of everything our family had never clearly divided. The shopland, the hayfield, the storage lot, the rear acreage, the old equipment shed. The emotional property we all treated as shared because nobody wanted to admit who maintained what. Mark's truck was parked crooked beside the barn. Jenna's SUV was behind Mom's car. A black sedan I did not recognize sat under the pecan tree. A man in a gray suit stood on the porch talking to Dad. Dad turned when we pulled in. He looked pale, but strangely steady. Mark came down the steps fast. "You've got to be kidding me," he said. "You brought them?" Ava heard it. Miles heard it. Evan put one hand gently on Miles's shoulder. Dad's voice cut across the yard. "Mark." My brother stopped. Dad held up his phone. "I saw what you wrote." Mark looked at me as if I had committed an unforgivable betrayal by showing the person he had impersonated. "It was taken out of context." Dad walked down one step. "The context is you used my name to keep my daughter, my son-in-law, and my grandchildren away from my house on Father's Day." Mom appeared behind him, pale and twisting a napkin. "Bill, please, not in the yard." Dad did not look back. "Where would you prefer, Elaine?" "In the office where he wanted me to sign over the business before lunch," Jenna whispered. "Sign over what?" The man in the suit stepped forward. "I'm Thomas Greer, Mr. Henson's attorney." I recognized the name. Dad had used him after Grandma Henson died. Dad looked at me. "I called Tom after you sent the screenshot. He was already on his way because Mark told him we needed a quick witness for succession papers." Thomas's voice remained calm. "I was told all interested family members had reviewed the documents and agreed in principle." Evan opened his bag. "We have reviewed nothing." Mark laughed too loud. "Because it's not his business." Dad turned on him. "Evan is family." The porch went silent. It was the first time my father had ever said those words in front of Mark without cushioning them. Evan did not smile. He only nodded once, as if accepting something long overdue, but not pretending it erased what came before. Dad motioned us into the house. The dining room was already set for Father's Day. Blue plates, mason jars with wildflowers, framed photos stacked beside the centerpiece because I had delivered them the night before. The gift box with the video montage sat unopened on the sideboard. The barbecue had not arrived yet. The quartet would come in 2 hours. Every object in that room felt like evidence of how hard I had tried to make people happy while they planned around my absence. Dad led us into the den. Mark stepped into the doorway before Evan could enter. "This is Henson business." Dad said, "Move." Mark moved, not because he respected Evan, because he had never heard Dad use that tone with him. On Dad's desk sat a stack of papers clipped with a blue binder clip. Thomas picked them up and adjusted his glasses. "These documents create a new entity called Henson Legacy Management, LLC, he said. Mark would become managing member. William would transfer voting control of Henson equipment and feed, the rear acreage, the storage lot leases, and several equipment assets to that entity. My ears filled with a low hum. Dad whispered, "I thought it was a protection plan," Thomas continued. "The papers also state that Claire Henson Brooks has voluntarily withdrawn from operational interest, and that her spouse's interference has created a risk of future family litigation." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because the sentence was so polished, so clean, so different from the dirty little text that had been used to keep me away. Thomas turned the page. "There is also a provision limiting future access to the farmhouse property and related land to approved Henson line descendants and their approved guests." The room blurred. Henson line descendants. My children were outside the den with their handmade cards, and Mark had tried to turn them into conditional guests at their grandfather's home. I looked at him. "You tried to write my family out of Dad's property." He rolled his eyes. "Oh, stop. It prevents lawsuits from outsiders if something happens to Dad." Dad slammed his palm on the desk. "My grandchildren are not outsiders." Mark flinched. Mom began to cry. "Bill, your heart." Dad pointed to the chair without looking at her. "Sit down if you need to, Elaine. But do not use my heart to end this conversation." That sentence changed the room almost as much as the text had. A health concern had always appeared when truth became inconvenient. Mom's nerves, Dad's pressure, a headache, stress. The person being harmed was then expected to become quiet because accountability might make someone feel worse. This time, Dad refused to be used as the shield. Thomas asked whether he could review the supporting packet Mark had provided. Mark said no. Dad said yes. The packet began with financial projections showing Henson equipment and feed in dangerous decline. The next page listed unpaid vendor balances. Another showed the equipment loan. Another described a proposed sale of the rear acreage to a storage developer. I recognized that land. It was where Dad taught Ava to fly a kite. It was where Miles collected rocks in a coffee can. It was also the parcel Grandma Henson had asked Dad not to sell unless the family faced a true emergency. Evan leaned forward. "May I see the vendor balances?" Thomas handed him a copy. Evan scanned the numbers, then removed his own file from his bag. "These balances do not match the supplier statements Dad asked Claire to scan," Mark snorted. "You've been here 10 minutes. Evan did not look up. "This feed supplier credit is listed as unpaid debt. It should reduce the balance by $14,620. This equipment lease was paid off last year. This invoice belongs to a credit card processor, not a parts vendor. And this line appears twice under 2 different vendor names." Dad looked at Mark. "What is he saying?" Evan placed the paper on the desk. "Either the shop is not in the financial condition this packet claims, or someone made it look worse to justify transferring control and selling land." Mark's face darkened. "Do not let him talk to me like I'm a criminal." Dad's voice went quiet. "Then answer like an honest man." No one moved. That silence was the first real confession. Mark turned toward Mom. "You believe this? You're going to let them ruin Father's Day?" Mom looked at Dad, then at me, then at the floor. "I didn't know the children were being excluded," she whispered. I wanted that to be enough. A part of me, the tired daughter part, wanted to accept ignorance because ignorance was easier to forgive than choice. But Ava's face under the bridge project rose in my memory. I said, "You knew enough not to ask." Mom flinched. Jenna twisted her bracelet until her knuckle turned white. I looked at her. "Did you know about the text?" She shook her head quickly, then slower. "Mark said Dad wanted a smaller day. Did you ask Dad?" Her silence answered. Thomas continued reading. "There is an indemnity clause. If signed, Claire would release the estate, the company, and Mark from claims related to unpaid labor, prior support, family property access, and business expectation." I frowned. "Why would I need to release claims I never made?" Evan answered quietly. "Because someone is afraid you might make them after seeing the books." Dad walked to the old metal filing cabinet beside the window. "Open it." Mark stepped forward. "Dad, no. Open it. I have customer information in there. It is my office." Mark did not move. Dad took a key from his pocket and unlocked the drawer himself. Inside were ordinary folders, tax records, payroll, insurance, vendor contracts. But the bottom drawer held a black lockbox I had never seen. Dad stared at it. "I didn't put that there," Mark said. "That's mine." Dad held out his hand. "Key." "No." It was one small word, but it stripped away the last bit of performance. Thomas documented the refusal. Evan photographed the cabinet. Mark began talking quickly about privacy, trust, how Dad had given him operational discretion, how Claire and Evan were trying to take over because they had always thought they were better. Then he said one sentence too many. "You know, Claire never wanted the shop. She just wants control now because her kids are getting older, and she needs something to make them feel like real Hensons." Dad stood. He was not as tall as he had been when I was a child. Age had settled into his shoulders. Fear had bent him these past 2 years. But in that moment, Mark looked smaller than him. "Get out of my office," Mark blinked. "What?" "Out." "Dad," I said out. Mark looked at Mom, expecting rescue. She pressed the napkin to her mouth. He looked at Jenna. She looked away. Then he looked at me with hatred so pure it seemed almost clean. "You'll regret this," he said. Dad's answer was quiet. "I already do." Mark left the den, but not the property. We could hear him pacing on the porch, making calls, his voice rising and falling like he was trying to rebuild the old room from outside it. The barbecue arrived 20 minutes later. So did the quartet. So did 3 relatives who had expected smoked ribs and old stories and instead walked into the aftermath of a family myth collapsing. Dad made a decision I did not expect. He did not cancel the meal. He went onto the porch where everyone had gathered awkwardly and stood beside the pecan tree. His hands shook. His face looked gray. But his voice carried. "Before we eat," he said, "I need to correct something." Mom reached for his arm. He took her hand gently, held it for 1 second, and continued. "My daughter Claire, her husband Evan, and their children were told not to come today. My name was used. I did not say that. I never wanted them excluded from my house or from this family." Ava stood beside me holding her card. Miles leaned into Evan's leg. Dad looked at them. "If I ever made you feel unsure of that because I stayed quiet when I should have spoken, I am sorry." Ava's eyes filled. Miles asked loudly because he was 7, "So you still want the toolbox?" A few people laughed softly, not because it was funny, but because children sometimes pull air back into a room adults have emptied. Dad crouched with effort. "Yes, buddy, I would like it very much." The day did not become happy. Life is not a movie where one speech cleans the table. Mark refused to eat and left before lunch. Jenna cried in the hallway. Mom moved through the kitchen, touching plates she did not need to move. Relatives whispered over iced tea. The quartet played anyway, which made the whole day feel like a funeral wearing summer clothes. But my children gave Dad their gifts. Ava read her card. Miles explained every crooked cardboard tool. Dad listened as if each little paper wrench were evidence in a case he had almost lost. After lunch, Dad asked Evan and me to stay while the children went outside with Jenna's daughter and the dog. In the den, Thomas explained what needed to happen next. Dad would formally revoke Mark's informal authority. Bank access would be reviewed. The loan paperwork would be obtained directly from Cedar Valley Bank. The shop books would be examined by an outside accountant. The land transfer documents would be voided and preserved as evidence, not destroyed. Mark's role at Henson Equipment and Feed would be suspended pending review. Mom began crying again. "He's your son." Dad looked exhausted. "So is Claire my daughter." She covered her mouth. I had waited 36 years to hear that sentence said, not as biology, but as priority. Evan placed the loan statement on the desk. "There's something else," he said. "The account connected to this loan received deposits from customer payments." Dad frowned. "What deposits?" "At least 4 rental payments from the storage lot. About $28,400 visible from partial records. They should have gone into the shop account." Thomas asked if there were signs of more. Evan hesitated. "Yes." Dad closed his eyes. I thought he might finally break. Instead, he opened them and said, "Then we get full records." Over the next 10 days, my family tried to separate the text from the documents. Mark told relatives that I had weaponized a misunderstanding. He said Dad had been tired, confused, vulnerable. He said Evan manipulated financial records because he wanted control of Henson property. He posted an old photo of himself and Dad at the shop with the caption, "Some people forget who built the legacy," I wanted to answer. My thumb hovered over the comment box, while anger wrote 100 versions of the truth. Then, Dad answered before I could. He commented beneath Mark's post, using his own account. "I built this business with help from many people, including my daughter. My son does not speak for me." Mark deleted the post in 4 minutes. Screenshots lasted longer. The accountant's review began with 3 years of records. Within a week, it expanded to 5. Mark had not destroyed the shop in one dramatic theft. He had bled it carefully. That made it worse. A steakhouse dinner became vendor relations. A weekend hotel became storm inspection. Concert tickets were coded as customer entertainment, though the customer was Mark's old football friend. Fuel reimbursements appeared twice. Cash withdrawals were labeled dock repairs for a dock the shop did not own. Storage lot payments had been routed through a temporary account, skimmed, then partially returned so the pattern looked like delay instead of theft. The lockbox contained customer checks, a prepaid phone, printed email threads with a storage developer, and a draft consulting agreement that would pay Mark $54,000 if the rear acreage sale closed. There was also a folder labeled BR Supply. Blue Ridge Supply did not exist the way a vendor should exist. It had a mailing address at a UPS store, and invoices for equipment parts the shop had never received. The accountant traced several payments to a company owned by Mark's friend from high school. The confirmed amount reached $79,240. Questionable exposure tied to the loan, phantom invoices, and land deal was far larger. Mark's motive, when it finally came into focus, was not simply greed. It was panic wearing entitlement. He had refinanced his house twice without telling his wife. He had borrowed against a boat Dad thought was paid off. He had sports betting debt, private credit lines, and a personal loan from a man Dad described only as trouble. He had promised Paula, his wife, that taking over the shop would solve everything. He had promised my parents that selling the rear acreage would stabilize the family business. He had promised himself that once he had official control, every unauthorized decision could be relabeled as leadership. Evan discovering the numbers threatened more than Mark's pride. It threatened his entire escape plan. That was why he wanted Evan gone on Father's Day. My children were collateral damage because excluding only my husband would have looked suspicious. Calling all four of us your side of the family made it sound emotional instead of financial. That realization hurt differently. It meant the cruelty had been strategic. Ava's tears, Miles's confusion, my old fear of rejection, Dad's name, Mark used all of it because it helped hide money. When confronted, Mark did what people like him often do. He changed stories. First, the charges were reimbursements. Then, receipts were misplaced. Then, Dad had approved everything verbally. Then, Evan had misunderstood rural business practices. Then, I had always wanted to punish him for being Dad's chosen son. Finally, in one meeting with Thomas and the accountant, he slapped the table and said, "I was trying to keep the place alive while Claire sat in her perfect house judging us." Dad asked, "Keeping it alive for whom?" Mark had no answer. My mother's journey was slower. At first, she defended him because reflex is faster than truth. He was under pressure. He has boys to support. He thought the land sale would help everyone. I finally asked her, "Do my children become real to you only when they are hurt politely?" Her face changed as if I had slapped her, but she did not answer. A week later, she came to my house alone. It was raining. She stood on the porch with an umbrella and a plastic container of muffins, because in my family, food often arrived when words had failed. I did not invite her in right away. She looked at the doorframe instead of at me. "I knew Mark resented Evan," she said. "That's not an apology." "I know." Rain tapped the porch roof. She swallowed. "I knew he wanted Father's Day smaller. I told myself it was because your father got overwhelmed. I did not ask what smaller meant because I was afraid the answer would require me to disagree with him." "With Mark?" "With Mark. With your father. With the whole way we have done things." I waited. My mother had always been good at crying before naming the harm. This time, I needed the name. She said, "I liked your father being peaceful more than I protected you from what that peace cost." It was the most honest thing she had ever said to me. I opened the door, not wide, enough. Inside, she apologized to Evan first. She said she had treated him like an attachment instead of a son-in-law, and that when he asked responsible questions, she allowed Mark to frame him as a threat. Evan thanked her but did not reassure her. That mattered. In our family, apologies had always been treated like receipts you handed over in exchange for immediate comfort. Evan refused the exchange. He accepted her words without pretending trust had been restored. Then she asked to speak with Ava and Miles. I said yes, only if she understood they did not have to comfort her. She nodded. Ava listened with crossed arms. Miles sat beside his sister, holding a toy truck. Mom said, "I am sorry I helped make you feel unwelcome at Grandpa's house. You did nothing wrong." Ava asked, Did Grandpa really want us there? Yes, Mom whispered. He did. Then why didn't you say that before? My mother's eyes filled. Because I was afraid of making Uncle Mark angry. Ava looked at her for a long time. That's not a good reason. No, Mom said, it isn't. Ava did not hug her. I was proud of my daughter for that, though it hurt to see a child needing such wisdom. Boundaries are not coldness. Sometimes they are the first warm room a child has ever been allowed to stand inside. Jenna came next, but not with muffins. She came to the shop after Ruth Delgado took over operations. Ruth was the outside manager Dad hired within 2 weeks of suspending Mark. She had run operations for a farm supply chain and did not care about Henson family feelings. In her first 48 hours, she found inventory counts wrong, vendor rates inflated through Mark's friend, and a used tractor listed as sold for parts, even though it had been repaired and sold privately. Jenna found me behind the counter, labeling old customer files. She had not slept well. Her mascara was gone. Her voice sounded smaller than usual. I owe you an apology, she said. I leaned against the counter. For what? That question startled her. In our family, I'm sorry usually floated in the air until everyone politely pretended it had landed somewhere specific. Jenna looked down. For pretending neutrality was kindness. I waited. Mark told me to support the smaller Father's Day because Evan was going to embarrass Dad. I didn't ask why Evan would do that. I didn't want to know. And when your kids got included, I told myself Mark was just careless with words. But he is never careless with words when he wants something. That was true. Mark had chosen exactly the right sentence. Dad doesn't want your family here. Not I don't. Dad doesn't. He had tried to turn my deepest wound into a locked gate. Jenna placed an envelope on the counter. Inside was a cashier's check for $6,400. What is this? The remainder of the kitchen repair money you gave me last year. You said insurance reimbursed you. It did. She looked ashamed. I kept both. I told myself you didn't need it because you and Evan were stable. I'm not Mark, but I benefited from the same system. I stared at the check. That was how repair began with Jenna. Not with tears. With repayment. Mark refused that kind of repair. He refused the repayment agreement. He refused mediation. He refused to admit the text had been a lie. He told Dad that if the matter went legal, Dad would lose both his son and his grandsons. Dad cried the night he told me. Not loud crying. Dad was not built that way. His voice simply thinned until it barely carried through the phone. I let him think love meant no consequence, he said. That was not love. That was fear wearing my face. The civil claim was filed in August. No one went to jail. The confirmed losses were handled through repayment, forfeited inheritance advances, sale of an investment account Dad had funded for Mark years earlier, and a settlement secured against Mark's future share of non-essential assets. The potential land deal was canceled before closing. Cedar Valley Bank restructured the legitimate portion of the loan after Dad signed a statement explaining that Mark's authority had been misrepresented. Mark lost his job at the shop. He eventually took a warehouse position 2 counties away. Paula, his wife, moved with their sons to her sister's house for 3 months after discovering the debts, the hidden betting accounts, and the consulting agreement. She did not divorce him immediately, but she required financial counseling, separate accounts, and full disclosure before moving back. Their sons continued seeing Dad, but only with Paula present. That was important to me. Children should not be punished for adult lies, but neither should children be used as shields against accountability. Dad rewrote his estate plan that fall. This time, he did not hide the process behind discomfort. He invited me, Jenna, and Mom to Thomas Greer's office. Mark was notified separately through his attorney. Dad's new plan protected all grandchildren's education accounts equally. The farmhouse was placed into a trust with clear rules. No one could use it to exclude spouses or children. No one could claim it as the family house while refusing upkeep. And any sale of land required independent review. Henson equipment and feed would be professionally managed. Family members could work there only through ordinary employment contracts. No automatic authority, no silent access, no keys handed out because someone had the right last name. When Thomas finished explaining, Dad looked at me. "I should have done this years ago." I said yes. He nodded. He did not ask me to make the truth softer. That became our new beginning. Not a hug with music playing, not a magical return to Sunday dinners. A man sitting in a lawyer's office, accepting that love without structure had allowed harm. For months, my relationship with Dad felt like walking through a house after a storm. The roof was still there. The rooms were familiar. But every board had to be tested before I trusted my weight on it. He called every Thursday evening, not to ask for help, but to ask about the children. At first, Ava answered politely and handed me the phone. Miles told him about school and then ran off. Evan stayed cordial. Nobody rushed. Dad did not complain. That mattered more than any dramatic apology. One Saturday, he asked if he could come watch Ava's robotics club demonstration. I said I would ask her. Ava thought about it, then said, "He can come, but Uncle Mark can't." I told Dad exactly that. He said, "That is fair." At the demonstration, Dad sat in the second row and clapped too loudly when Ava's little robot pushed a block across the table. She tried not to smile and failed. Afterward, Dad did not say, "See, everything is fine now." He only said, "Thank you for letting me come." That was new. My mother struggled more. She missed the old family gatherings, or at least the idea of them. She would say things like, "It feels strange not having everyone together," and I would answer, "Everyone was not together before. Some of us were just quiet." At first, she cried when I said that. Then she began to nod. Progress in families like mine is not always a grand revelation. Sometimes it is one person finally nodding at a sentence they used to punish. The following spring, the shop stabilized. Ruth reduced waste, renegotiated contracts, and brought back customers who had left because Mark was rude when Dad was not around. Dad started spending mornings at the counter again, not as the unquestioned owner, but as the old man who knew which farmer needed a discount and which kid should be handed a free packet of sunflower seeds. One afternoon, I found him behind the shop, looking across the rear field Mark had tried to sell. "You know," he said, "your grandmother told me once that land remembers who took care of it." I smiled sadly. Grandma said things like that when she wanted you to stop being stubborn. She was usually right. Yes. He looked at me. I let Mark act like inheritance belonged to the loudest child. You showed me it should belong to the people willing to protect what matters. I wanted that sentence to heal everything. Part of me was still the little girl under the workbench, sorting bolts into jars, waiting for Dad to say I had done well. But adult forgiveness is not a performance for the person who failed you. It is a slow review of whether truth keeps showing up after the apology. "I'm glad you see it now," I said. "I'm still hurt you didn't see it sooner." His eyes watered. I know. He did not defend himself. That helped more than any speech. The next Father's Day looked different. No giant gathering, no cousins watching to see who provided what. No Mark at the grill making jokes with edges. Dad asked if he could come to our house for lunch. He brought his own chair, a strawberry pie from the church bakery, and a small envelope for each child. Inside were handwritten notes, not money. Ava's said, "I am proud of how carefully you ask questions." Miles's said, "I am proud of how you build things again when the first version falls apart." Mine was longer. "Claire, I used your steadiness as if it were a family resource, instead of recognizing it as a gift you were choosing to give. I let your brother use my silence because I had already taught him silence could be borrowed. I am sorry. I want the years I have left to be clear." I folded the note and placed it in my desk. Not because everything was fixed, because some evidence deserves preservation. After lunch, Dad asked if he could see the toolbox card from the year before. Miles had kept it in his closet, bent in one corner. The blue paper faded. Dad held it like it was made of something breakable. That was the day I almost lost the right to receive things like this, he said. Miles leaned against him. But Mom sent you the text? Dad looked at me. Yes, he said. And I finally believed what was in front of me. That is what changed everything. Not the screenshot alone, not the lawyer, not the audit, the loan, the lockbox, the land deal, or the money. What changed everything was that my father saw the pattern and did not ask me to keep carrying it quietly. My brother said Dad did not want my family there. Then Dad saw the text. And for the first time, the person whose name had been used to hurt us took his name back. I used to believe family was proven by showing up no matter how people treated you. Now I believe family is proven by what people do when your pain becomes inconvenient. Do they ask you to keep the peace? Or do they help tell the truth? My children learned something that Father's Day. I wish they had learned it through kindness instead of harm, but they learned it all the same. They learned that exclusion can be challenged. They learned that adults can be wrong and still choose repair. They learned that love does not require walking through a door after someone tells you not to come. Sometimes love sounds like a father saying, "Bring them." Sometimes accountability sounds like a lockbox staying closed until truth forces it open. Sometimes healing begins with one screenshot sent to the person whose silence everyone else was counting on. So tell me, if someone used a parent's name to push your family out of a celebration, would you stay home to avoid conflict? Or would you let the parent see exactly what had been said? Share your thoughts below. Someone reading your words may need the courage to stop protecting a lie just because it was spoken by family. Thank you for listening to this fictional story until the end. It was created for entertainment, reflection, and discussion. It does not represent real people or real events. May it remind you that your kindness has value, your family has dignity, and no one should be allowed to use your silence as proof that they were right.